Hi, I'm Adam Brown.
And I'm Danielle
And in this episode of our Gamified World, we're going to examine the intersection of gamification and education.
That's right. We not only teach and research gamification, but we've also applied it in a couple of our projects.
Yeah, so let's grab a seat and have a chat.
So this is probably a good opportunity for us to explain what we do at Deakin University. I'm an interactive media developer in the health faculty.
And I'm a digital media lecturer in the Faculty of Arts and Education. And we first met some years ago, really early on in terms of when we were looking at gamification. I think you discovered it first. We met on Twitter via social media, didn't know each other. We were working for the same institution. But we decided after things kind of snowballed, after a video or two, we decided to start this web series. And then we kind of figured, well, we've got to apply this stuff, and you're already doing it, and I sort of at the very last minute decided that I was going to apply gamification without having a clue about how I was going to do it about 3 weeks before a trimester started. So that gave rise to an epic narrative in itself. But we use very different forms of gamification. What sort of were the main reasons why you employed it? How did you come across it, and why did you sort of help another lecturer, in a sense, develop something for their unit?
Well, I had been studying web development through Team Treehouse prior to coming into this role, and then still upskilling in this role a couple of years ago. And I was just excited to use gamification in any chance I could. And when I was approached by a nutrition educator that had an engagement crisis, I thought, well, this is a fantastic opportunity, because the story of hemp was such a controversial topic and such a layered narrative that I thought, well, let's put some fiction but interweave it with the real factual story, and let's see what happens. And the students received it quite well.
Yeah, you had a really different crisis of engagement to me. I mean, it's the same kind of crisis in some ways, but you had a unit where students were kind of required to read these really hefty legal readings basically in this area. So you were making this kind of content form of gamification. I, on the other hand, work with social media, so my purpose in life a lot of the time is to get people active online using real-world social media platforms, get them tweeting, get them blogging, get them podcasting, video making, all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't seeing that happen. That was sort of all the units, undergrad and postgrad, I was teaching. I was not seeing that happen. People were still enjoying having some teaching videos instead of lectures, and they were enjoying the different kinds of assessment, but I wasn't getting the extra kind of community building that I wanted to see in social media. And so I decided to develop what I called the Tiffet system, after my canine companion Tiffany, who was kind of a mini celebrity, much more than any student tutor or myself in the unit, because she's got her own Twitter account. And so the Tiffet system was my way of really trying to combat this crisis of engagement. And it used a structural form of gamification, lots of different game mechanics, very different to your more game-like, but still kind of content gamified system.
I would say my project really heavily rested on narrative.
Yeah. Mine was kind of a framework through which I was trying to entice engagement. So it was really, the whole point was to get students doing things by using game mechanics around it. So I developed this Tiffet system, which was essentially a point system where students would start with a certain number of points. I won't go into all the details. It's a very convoluted system for myself to work out even now. But students would get Tiffet points on a tally board. It wasn't a leaderboard as such. It wasn't sort of ranked, but there's a tally board that I did via a Google Drive spreadsheet, and students could see how they were going in relation to other students if they wanted to. But basically, they would gain points from being active online. So when I saw tweets, or especially blogs and videos and stuff like that, students would get a certain number of Tiffets. So it was kind of a manually evaluated system where I was tracking online activities 7 days a week, and really, seeing the difference there was an interesting thing. I also use digital badges, so if students got a certain number, they got to a certain threshold, they would get awarded a digital badge, which was tweeted out with their handle, a nice little picture of Tiffany, and people really loved that. They loved the kind of acknowledgement, the public acknowledgement, and the gratification of students kind of liking it and commenting, that sort of thing. But also I used unlockable content, where if they got to a certain sort of, fairly low threshold, it wasn't compulsory kind of essential content, but I unlocked certain videos which would then be emailed to students who'd reached that level at that point in the trimester. All these kinds of things sort of came together in a quite a complex Tiffet system that I developed. In a sense, yours was immensely complex in design, whereas mine was complex in delivery, I guess is the main difference there too.
I'm interested in what type of, commitment was there? Like, what toll was it taking on you as an educator?
Well, in terms of resourcing, that's kind of one of the key lessons that I've drawn from my application of gamification. And you can listen to gamification podcasts, and there's quite often a really common tip that's given to everyone who gamifies something. And I kind of knew what I was getting myself into beforehand. But everyone says, start small. Do a week's worth in educational context, that kind of thing. And that's quite often, a good way to start. So in terms of resources, it really was 7 nights a week, often up till 2 a.m. at a spreadsheet, but really gratifying to see the student engagement transform in the way that it did. And the one thing about that is that now that I'm sort of teaching different units and larger cohorts, I've had a first year unit of 400 plus students, you can't do that Tiffet system anymore. So I've now got to rethink how I gamify my teaching. And I actually realized that I still do gamify my teaching. And I do that intentionally, and I don't usually explicitly highlight it as much. But even when I release kind of my favorite GIF of the day, I reply to a student who's done something great on the hashtag that day on Twitter, or I unlock content via the hashtag. I mean, anyone who's exploring the unit hashtag via Twitter in a unit is essentially doing a unit-related activity, and if I'm posting a live broadcast or something else to the hashtag that's not going to be shared via the learning management system, that to me is actually still unlocking content. It's just not as explicitly so. So it's actually kind of more subtle, and while I don't have a point system anymore, there's certain elements, lessons that I've got from that, and having little side quests, the challenges where you put out, it's what a lot of education does anyway, without necessarily conceptualizing it as gamification. Using checklists is another mechanic in games, and students love them. They love checking things off, and they're all completionists when it comes to checklists a lot of the time.
Aren't we all? It's interesting, checklists have become a very easy to use game mechanic that often I've seen in platforms such as FutureLearn and Lynda. So this is pretty, I suppose you could say, easy to implement, low-level gamification, but there is that release of dopamine when we do check off those lists.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I suppose another thing about gamification in educational context, part of the reason, I guess, loosely that we got into it is that there's a lot of talk about it around, especially online. Industries have been engaging with it for a while. But in education, there's not much research into it. And there's more research into it than there's actually application.
And you see that with game-based learning as well. And it's interesting because a lot of the time people feel they can't work within the constraints of the semester system or the trimester system in our case, whereas you absolutely can. It just takes good planning and good delivery.
Yeah, and just a bit of confidence to try something, and some things will not work. Some things fail, and that's kind of a key lesson of education generally. Not everything's going to work, and it won't work for everyone, but in my experience, gamification has provided at least a partial solution, and it's the only partial solution that I've really found for the crisis of engagement that we hear about on a day-to-day basis across the board at all institutions, not only educational institutions, but industries all over the place. And actually engaging, motivating people to do training in organizations. We'll talk about these kinds of things, no doubt, in other episodes, but education generally doesn't just have to be thought of as school.
Thanks for watching, and feel free to subscribe to our channel or leave us a comment or question below.
You can also find our Gamified World on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook and SoundCloud, the links to which are in the description.
And join us next week where we explore gamification in health-related contexts.
See you soon.